Welcome to this video. Today I'm doing a book study on an article inside the book Studies in Occultism. The article is titled The Constitution of the Inner Man. The book is by the founder of the Theosophical Society, Helena Petrova Blavatsky. So let's go ahead. In this article, HPB or Helena Petrovna Blavatsky begins with comparing the Hindu fivefold division of the human constitution with the Theosophic sevenfold one, and also Tao Te King, who also describes a fivefold constitution. Then she goes on to describe the Taraka Raj Yoga. So, those who study metaphysical, philosophical things are aware that the Hindus talk about the body being fivefold. That is the physical body or Annamaya Kosha, the pranic body or Pranamaya Kosha, then Manomaya Kosha or the mental body, Vijnanamaya Kosha, which is our wisdom body and knowledge body, and Anandamaya Kosha, which is our bliss body, possibly referring to a, a soul. I'm not clear what the Anandamaya Kosha will refer to. Maybe the wisdom of higher component of wisdom or the soul. So this is the five components of the Hindu system. And according to HPB, even Tao Te King also has a fivefold system. But the theosophic concept has always been a sevenfold system, as you can see here in the drawing. Bottom most part below this physical, the word is brain, which you can't see. So this is the physical component of our physical body. Then we have an etheric component, which is also called Linga Sharira in the Hindu system. Then we have the Kama Rupa or emotional body. Then our minds are divided into two parts. One is the lower mind, which is what we always use and we think through. The higher mind is something not accessible to most of us. It's the difference between the lower mind and higher mind is supposed to be a millionfold in abilities. So this higher mind is separated from the lower component. There is an interface between the two, which is our conscience and also called antakarna, between the higher and the lower. Then there is the buddhi, buddhic body or buddhi, and finally the atma. And the atma is something common to all of us. So the top three is called the atma, buddhi, manas, or the higher triad, and the lower is the lower manas, kama, rupa, etheric body, and physical body. So this is the general constitution. So let us look at how she describes this. Then there is she's describing the Tarak Raj Yoga. Then there is the Tarak Raj Yoga school. It teaches its teachings recognize only three principles. In fact, but then in reality, their Sthula Upadhi is the same as a physical body or the physical body in its Jagrat or waking condition, their Sukshma Upadhi, the same body in Swapna or dreaming state, and their Karnopadhi or causal body or that which passes from one incarnation to another are all dual in aspects and thus make six. Add to this Atma, the impersonal divine principle or the immortal element in man, undistinguished from the universal spirit, and you have the same seven again as in the esoteric or theosophic division. So, what she says is that as per the Tarakaya Raj Yoga, they are only saying about three bodies, Sthula Upadhi, Sukshma Upadhi, and Karna Upadhi. But each of these Upadhis have got two components. The Sthula Upadhi has got the etheric double or the Linga Sharira also. The Sukshma Upadhi has got the astral body or the emotional body and the lower mental body. And the Karna Upadhi has got the higher mental body and the Buddhic body. So each of them have got two. So that itself makes it six. And on top of that, you have the Atma. And here she says the Atma is the impersonal divine principle or the immortal element in man, undistinguished. So it is not any different from that highest, the universal spirit. So she says even that Tarak Raj Yoga is also the same as what Theosophy says. Now, here she describes what is Atma. First of all, spirit, in the sense of the absolute and therefore invisible all, or Atma. As this neither can be located nor conditioned in philosophy, being simply that which is in eternity, and the all cannot be absent from even the tiniest geometrical or mathematical point of the universe of matter or substance, it ought not to be called in truth a human principle at all. She says that this thing called Atma is there in every single point in this universe. So you can't call it an individual human principle at all. Then she says, rather, and at best, it is that point in metaphysical space which the human monad and its vehicle, man, occupy for the period of every life. Now, that point is as imaginary as man himself, and in reality is an illusion, a maya. But then for ourselves, as for our other personal egos, we are a reality during that fit of illusion called life. And we have to take ourselves into account in our own fancy at any rate, if no one else does. Occultism calls it the seventh principle, the synthesis of the six, and gives it for vehicle the spiritual soul, buddhi. So here you can see what she's saying is that this thing called Atma is there all over. There is no point in space where this Atma is not there. So we can't call it our Atma, but still we still have to call it something because that is the permanent part of it, us. And then she says that this permanent part of it, us, is immortal and has got a vehicle called the Buddhi, which is the wisdom body. So what is the Buddhi? The divine soul or buddhi then is the vehicle of the spirit. In conjunction, these two are one, impersonal, and without any attributes on this plane, of course, and make two spiritual principles. So, from our own plane, the plane we live in, we can't understand what the buddhi is, but for us, we do not know it in our mental language what the buddhi component really is. So, these are the two principles, the spiritual principles which are inside us. Then the question is, why is the manas divided into two principles, the lower and the higher manas? So this here she explains this. If we pass on to the human soul, manas, the men's, everyone will agree that the intelligence of man is dual, to say the least. That is, for example, the high-minded man can hardly become low-minded. The very intellectual and spiritual minded man is separated by an abyss from the obtuse and dull material, if not animal minded man. So all of us have got, we can sense that we sometimes operate from a more idealistic space, from a holistic space, from a space of caring for others, not just our own selves. And then there is another space we can operate from, which is a very selfish, self-centered space where we don't care for anybody else. And we are in a sort of a very negative and aggressive space. So there are two, the animal man and the intellectual or spiritual minded man. Then she goes on to say, why then should not these men be represented by two principles, or two aspects rather? Every man has these two principles in him, one more active than the other, and in rare cases, one of these is entirely stunted in its growth. So to say, paralyzed by the strength and predominance of the other aspect during the life of man. These then are what we call the two principles or aspects of manas, the higher and the lower. The former, the higher manas, or the thinking conscious ego, gravitating towards the spiritual soul, and the latter, or its instinctual principle, attracted to karma, the seat of animal desires and passions in man. So these two, higher and lower, are attracted by their by their nature. One, the higher mind is attracted to the wisdom component or the Buddhic component, and the lower mind is attracted to the emotional component. So that is the difference between the higher and the lower. And because they are so different in their operation, it has been classified into two separate principles in theosophy. Now, in this article, she goes on to describe what the pineal gland is, what is its role. So, normally in science today, we think of the pineal gland as the organ, which is one among our endocrine glands, which produces the chemical melatonin, which helps us to sleep. So, in the picture on the right here, you can see that the pineal gland is connected to the eyes. When light starts coming onto the eye, then this melatonin is produced, and automatically the body goes to sleep. That is what is the scientific sort of thinking of the work of the pineal gland, the role of the pineal gland. But what does esoteric philosophy or theosophy say? She says the pineal gland is the very key to the highest and divinest consciousness in man, his omniscient, spiritual, and all embracing mind. This seemingly useless appendage is the pendulum, which, once the clockwork of the inner man is wound up, carries the spiritual vision of the ego to the highest planes of perception, where the horizon opens before it becomes almost infinite. So, I should have explained where the pineal gland is. Most of you would know probably it's here, this red twisted thing. This is the pineal gland. It looks like a pine cone, a very tiny pine cone. That's why it's called pineal. And it is right here above the brainstem, below all the cerebrum, and above the cerebellum. So that is the location of the pineal gland. Now, what she says is that it is what connects this lower mind of us to the higher mind, and if we are adequately prepared, then we get the perception of those higher planes, those immortal higher planes, which are infinite. So that is the work actually of the pineal gland. Then in the article, she describes what is Ishvara. Ishvara. Ishvara is the collective consciousness of the manifested deity, Brahma. That is the collective consciousness of the host of Dhyani Chauhans, and Pragya is their individual wisdom. So here in this article, she describes the difference between Ishvara and Brahma, Ishvara and Pragya. Ishvara is the collective consciousness of all the Dhyani Chauhans. Who are the Dhyani Chauhans? They are the creators of this universe. According to theosophy, when the first Parabrahm uh, decided to, whatever, at what stage it decides to develop the universe, it becomes from one, it becomes two, and two becomes three, and from three comes seven. The first seven are called the Dhyani Chauhans. They are the ones who are actually the builders. They are the ones who actually build this universe. They are intelligences of an enormous order, and they are. So she says, Ishvara is the collective consciousness of all these Dhyani Chauhans, and each one's individual wisdom is pragya. Let us look at it further. So now in this article, she describes the after death states in detail. Now, what she says is that whatever is your belief during your actual life about death, that leads to accordingly an experience. For example, if you had no belief in the afterlife death state, then you will have an immediate incarnation. You will not have any experience of the afterlife or post death state. You will not have any post death experience. You will have an immediate incarnation. So, what does she say? Having persistently denied an afterlife during this life, he will be unable to sense it. His spiritual senses have been stunted. They cannot develop after death, and he will remain blind. The whole gist of your question is to know whether, in the case of a downright materialist, the complete loss of self consciousness and self perception after death is possible. Isn't it so? I say it is possible. Now, let's pause here. So basically, here what she's saying is that you don't assume that after death you will suddenly develop all your thinking faculties, understanding faculties, and your all your ideas about life and death will change. Whatever is the set of ideas you have carried. For example, if you believe that all there is of life is only what we have on earth, and once we die there is nothing, you and so you live only for the materialistic gains in life, then that makes then your death will be according to that. You will have complete loss of self consciousness and self perception. That is what she says. Because believing firmly in our esoteric doctrine, which refers to the post-mortem period or the interval between two lives or births as merely a transitory state. I say, whether that interval between two acts of the illusionary drama of life lasts 1 year or a million, that post-mortem state may, without any breach of the fundamental law, prove to be just the same state as that of a man in a dead swoon. So you may be just in an unconscious state in that post mortem state without any experience. That's what she says. It is said in our esoteric school that between the buddhi and manas, or Ishvara and pragya, there is in reality no more difference than between a forest and its trees, a lake and its waters, just as Mandukya Upanishad teaches. 1 or 100 of trees dead from loss of vitality or uprooted are yet incapable of preventing the forest from being still a forest. The destruction or post mortem death of one personality dropped out of the long series will not cause the smallest change in the spiritual ego, and it will ever remain the same ego. Only instead of experiencing Devachan, it will have to immediately reincarnate. So basically, what she says is now you have the sevenfold body. Now, in this particular birth, you had no spiritual experience. You don't believe there is anything other than this physical birth, earth, and all you believe is in science, and science has to prove to you everything. And you completely live for hedonistic joys, for name, fame, achievement, and all that. You may even have feelings of philanthropy, doing good for the world, but then you may do that only because you want a name for yourself. You are constantly building a self, an image, a certain nature that you want to say, this is who I am, and you're obsessed and concerned only with that. Now that is a non-spiritual way of living, and that has been your style of living, and that is what we call materialistic life. Even if you're philanthropic, but your philanthropy is based on a selfish motive. Your philanthropy is not based on spiritual motives. So if you are like that, accordingly, you will have a post-death experience. But that highest buddhic component is there even in you. That highest buddhic component, Atma Buddhi Manas, that triad is there in you. So she says that triad is like a forest. One, and your physical birth is like one tree in it. Just because one tree is not able to imagine that forest does not mean the forest does not exist. So in this birth, if you had no such intuition about your higher self, you will just die, have no experience, and have go on to have an immediate incarnation. This is what she is saying in this part. Otherwise, if you did have belief, then you'll have an experience in that space called Devachan, which is the heavenly plane. Now, so here again, she describes this part in detail, that the afterlife depends on our beliefs and our nature. These are the things which make our afterlife. Karma acts incessantly. We reap in our afterlife only the fruits of that which we ourselves sown, or rather created in our terrestrial existence. So the questioner here asks, but if my ego can, and after the destruction of my body, become plunged in a state of entire unconsciousness, then where can be the punishment for the sins of my past life? The questioner is asking that if I have died and I am in an unconscious state, then what will be the punishment for all the wrongs that I have done? So here HPB says, by M they mean Madam HPB. So that's why they write M here. Our philosophy teaches that karmic punishment reaches the ego only in its next incarnation. After death, it receives only the reward for the unmerited sufferings endured during its past existence. The whole punishment after death, even for the materialist, consists therefore in the absence of any reward and the utter loss of consciousness of one's bliss and rest. So those who are have this belief and all these things will experience bliss and pure rest. But those who do not have a completely materialistic will have no such reward, and that will be the punishment for a person who is a materialistic. Then she says, karma is the child of the terrestrial ego, the fruits of the actions of the tree, which is the object, which is the objective personality visible to all, as much as a fruit of all the thoughts and even motives of the spiritual eye. But karma is also the tender mother who heals the wounds inflicted by her during the preceding life, before she will begin to torture this ego by inflicting upon him new ones. So actually, here I will read it further, which she will go on to say that all the suffering that we have on this earth, death is a great state of rest. We think we didn't deserve this suffering, but we have deserved it. We have done actions in the past which has caused the suffering in our present life, and death is a great rest. It's a blank, deep, beautiful, maybe with dreams, without dreams, sleep. And in that sleep, we feel complete rest, and we think the undeserved pain we are compensated for in death. That kind of state. But it is just a imaginary state of great bliss. So what she says is karma follows you everywhere. So karma will follow you in your next birth, even if you think that this birth you have done all good things, but you would have hurt a numerous number of people. You would have done a numerous horrible things in your life. You would have created so many negative thoughts which impact other people. So all that karma you have to face in the next birth. So she doesn't inflict all the wounds in one birth. Karma does not inflict everything in one birth. Then she says, if it may be said that there is not a mental or physical suffering in the life of a mortal, which is not the food, if it may be said that there is not a mental or physical suffering in the life of a mortal, which is not the fruit and consequence of some sin in this or a preceding existence, on the other hand, since he does not preserve the slightest recollection of it in his actual life and feels himself not deserving of such punishment, but believes sincerely he suffers for no guilt of his own. This alone is quite sufficient to entitle the human soul to the fullest consolation, rest, and bliss in his post mortem existence. So, I think this is something all of us will feel, that we don't deserve the suffering that we've got, though the reality is not that. So, for that that feeling that we don't deserve this suffering, the post mortem state is a great consolation, the rest and bliss. Then she says, death comes to our spiritual selves ever as a deliverer and friend. For the materialist, who, notwithstanding his materialism, was not a bad man, the interval between the two lives will be like the unbroken, placid sleep of a child. either entirely dreamless or with pictures of which he will have no definite perception. For the believer, it will be a dream as vivid as life and full of realistic bliss and visions. As for the bad and cruel man, whether materialist or otherwise, he will be immediately reborn and suffer his hell on earth. These are profound statements, really so beautiful. So actually, everything is our life now. Many of us live our life thinking our life will actually begin when we die. I don't know why, even in the spiritual circles, this kind of thinking is there that our life will begin only when we die. But the reality and what Theosophy teaches us is our life is here right now when we are alive. And anything and everything that we need to do, we should do now. Because it will be in next birth only when our new life will begin and when we will do other new things. So if we want to think or we want to change things, we want to do something with our life, we have to do it right now. Then she says there are three possible states after death. The ego receives always according to its deserts. After the dissolution of the body, that commences for it: one, either a period of full clear consciousness; two, a state of chaotic dreams; three, an utterly dreamless sleep, indistinguishable from annihilation. So it can be three different states which a human can have post death. One is he's fully conscious of what has happened to him. Second is he is in a dream state full of chaotic dreams. Third is he's in utter dreamless sleep, indistinguishable from annihilation. Means there's nothing there. There's zero. So he is really dead after he is dead. Death is sleep. On this, what does she say? Our physiologists find the cause of dreams and visions in an unconscious preparation for them during the waking hours. Why cannot the same be admitted for the post mortem dreams? What does this mean? She says, most of us have experienced this, that when we dream, most of our dreams are whatever has happened during the day. If you have read something, then we dream about that. If you have seen something we on any screen, we our mind is mixing those things up. So if there are 10 things we have seen during or had experience of during the day, it will take five things from that and create a new story in our mind, and that new story is a dream. So here she says, why can't the same thing which happens to us when we sleep, which we all have experienced, happen to us in the post mortem? That is, post mortem dreams can also be just like our normal sleep dreams. So she says, I repeat, death is sleep. After death begins, before the spiritual eyes of the soul, a performance according to a program learned and very often composed unconsciously by ourselves. The practical carrying out of the correct beliefs or of illusions which have been created by ourselves. A Methodist will be a Methodist, a Mussulman, of course, just for a time, in a perfect fool's paradise of each man's creation and making. These are the post mortem fruits of the tree of life. So, if I have built up, I have read all the things in Garud Puran, I have read all the things that C.W. Leadbeater has said about the Kamarupa plains and all the plains of the Devachan, all that imagination. I will be dreaming about all that in my post death state. Okay, even a theosophist will do that because you have created all that in your mind. So, whether it really exists or not, you will have dreams about that. Same, so here she's talking about a Christian, a Methodist, or a Muslim. Each one will have his own dreams and he will think that that is what is reality. But they're all just dreams because in his waking life, he created all of that in his mind as images of what will happen to him post death. So death is just like sleep in a way. We are dreaming a dream according to what are the thoughts that we have lived in our life. Next, the terrestrial and spiritual conscious existence. So the questioner here asks the materialist, disbelieving in everything that cannot be proven to him by his five senses or by scientific reasoning, and rejecting every spiritual manifestation, accepts life as the only conscious existence. Therefore, according to their beliefs, so will it be unto them. They will lose their personal ego and will plunge into dreamless sleep until a new awakening. Is it so? This questioner is asking the same thing we have already discussed, that those who are materialist will go into a dreamless sleep. Is that what is the truth? So, Madam Blavatsky here says, almost so. Remember the universal exoteric teaching of the two kinds of conscious existence, the terrestrial and the spiritual. The latter, that is the spiritual, must be considered real from the very fact that it is the region of the eternal, changeless, immortal cause of all, whereas the incarnating ego dresses itself up in new garments entirely different from those of its previous incarnations, and in which all except its spiritual prototype is doomed to a change so radical as to leave no trace behind. So basically, here she says that be aware that there is a conscious existence of that spiritual component which we looked at, the Atma Buddhi Manas. It is there, it is very real, and when we die, it still exists. So this physical body, this particular person, a person that we are in this birth, is just one dress, one garment that we wear, and we are completely unaware of the previous garments that we have worn in previous incarnations, and we will not leave any trace of this garment, and not a single trace will be left. Say 1,000 years from now, 2,000 years from now, nothing will be left. Maybe for a few decades there will be some trace, or maybe 50 years. The next generation, third generation, it's gone. After the fourth generation, nobody's going to remember you. So there is no trace of this personality that we have. Whereas that spiritual component continues to live. Now, the last part is only the aroma of the flower. What is it that we are carrying back permanently with us through each personality? So beautiful, this last teaching. The questioner asks, can the consciousness of my terrestrial ego perish not only for a time, like the consciousness of the materialist, but in any case so entirely as to leave no trace behind? Madame Blavatsky says, according to the teaching, is it must so perish and its fullness except that principle which, having united itself with the monad, has thereby become a spiritual indestructible essence, one with it in the eternity. Let me read that again. According to the teaching, it must so perish, and in its fullness, all except that principle, which having united itself with the monad, has thereby become a pure spiritual and indestructible essence, one with it in the eternity. Here she's saying that all that is the purest inside you, the highest thought process, the highest quality that you have is in your higher mind. That will unite itself with the monad, which is Atma Buddhi, and that will remain permanent inside you. That is the trace that you leave behind. Then she continues, but in the case of an out and out materialist, in whose personal eye no buddhi has ever reflected itself, how can the latter carry away into the infinitudes one particle of that terrestrial personality? Your spiritual eye is immortal, but from your present self, it can never carry away into afterlife but that which has become worthy of immortality, namely the aroma alone of the flower that has been mown by death, that has been the flower which has been killed by death, only its aroma, it is its beautiful essence, its perfection. That is what is going to be carried into your spiritual self. That is the only thing. If you don't have any such beautiful aroma in your lower mind, in your emotions, you have nothing that you will carry forward in future selves. Then the questioner asks, but this does not explain to me at all why you call life after death immortal, infinite, and real, and the terrestrial life as a simple phantom or illusion, since even the post mortem life has limits, however much wider they may be than those of terrestrial life. So the questioner asks, you're saying that a post-mortem death is an infinite immortal life, whereas the physical death is the terrestrial or earth life is an illusion. So Madame Blavatsky says, no doubt, the spiritual ego of man moves in eternity, like a pendulum between the hours of life and death. But if these hours marking the period of terrestrial and spiritual ego are limited in their duration, and if their number of such stages in eternity between sleeping and waking, illusion and reality, has its beginning and its end, on the other hand, the spiritual pilgrim is eternal. Let me read that again. The spiritual ego of man moves in eternity, like a pendulum between the hours of life and death. But if these hours, marking the period of terrestrial and spiritual life, are limited in their duration, and if the very number of such stages in eternity between sleeping and awakening, illusion and reality, has its beginning and its end, on the other hand, the spiritual pilgrim is eternal. So there is a beginning of our life, there is an end of our life. All of us have to agree that there is death at the end of our life. So there is a beginning and end of our life. There is the beginning and end of our death also, because we are going to be reborn again. So both life and death are periodical, like a pendulum. But the spiritual pilgrim, that is the astral, the Atma Buddhi Manas, that is eternal. That is what she said. Therefore, are the hours of his post-mortem life when disembodied, he stands face to face with truth and not the mirages of his transitory earthly existence. During the period of that pilgrimage, which we call the cycle of rebirths, the only reality in our conception. Such intervals, their limitation notwithstanding, 1 minute, just a minute, notwithstanding, do not prevent the ego, while ever perfecting itself, to be following undeviatingly through though gradual and slowly, the path to its last transformation, when the ego, having reached its goal, becomes the divine all. So the whole process of life and death is to ultimately change to such an extent that one becomes one with that divine all. These, then she says, these intervals and stages help towards this final result. So all this post life and death and all these stages of our life help towards the final result instead of hindering it. And without such limited intervals, the divine ego could never reach its ultimate goal. This ego is the actor, and its numerous and various incarnations, the parts it plays. This ego is the actor, and its numerous and various incarnations, the parts it plays. Shall you call these parts with their costumes the individuality of the actor himself? Like that actor, the ego is forced to play during the cycle of necessity up to the very threshold of paranirvana many such parts as may be unpleasant to it. We may have to play many, many such parts, and not all of it is going to be comfortable and easy for us. And we will have to go through a lot before we can actually reach that divine all. That is what she's saying. But as the bee collects its honey from every flower, leaving the rest as food for the earthly worms, so does our spiritual individuality, whether we call it Sutratma or ego, so does our Sutatma or ego. So basically, she says that just like a bee is collecting honey from every flower and does not take everything, even our spiritual self or our ego, that is our Atma Buddhi, collects such things from every birth, the best of every of that, the aroma, the honey, whatever. It collects that, it collects from, she says, it collects from every terrestrial personality into which karma forces it to incarnate. The nectar alone of the spiritual qualities and self consciousness, and uniting all these into one whole, it emerges from its chrysalis as the glorified Dhyani Chauhan. That is our goal. That is the goal of humanity, to all of us become those great saints, those great beings called Jnani Chauhans. And of course, below that are the adepts, below that are the seers, the saints, all that. So we have a long way to go to become from this very selfish, self centered, animal like, desirous, hedonistic uh, nature that we have as an ordinary human. Birth after birth, we begin to realize the actual meaning of life and what is the purpose of this whole existence. Then she says, so much the worse for those terrestrial personalities from which it could collect nothing. Such personalities cannot assuredly outlive consciously their terrestrial existence. So there are personalities from which the ego learns nothing. The Atma Buddhi Manas can take nothing from such personalities because it has only created karma and and been affected by past karma. Its entire business is only about living life just on earth and has no idea that it is going to continue in many different situations, and it's not learned anything from this life. So that is what she's trying to say here. Let's see. So that's it, and thank you so much for listening.